I stared at the unbelievable $10.5 million officially sitting in my personal bank account. My name is Valerie, a 34-year-old woman who just finalized the massive buyout of my own logistics company in Georgia. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands because I desperately wanted to call my family to share this life-changing financial victory. Before I could dial the number, my husband gently placed his hand over the glowing screen to stop me. He looked deeply into my eyes with an unusually serious expression that immediately made my heart beat faster. Instead of celebrating our incredible success, he proposed a completely insane plan that would ultimately expose the dark truth about my blood relatives. He held both of my hands tightly as he delivered a request that left me absolutely speechless in our quiet living room. "You need to call your sister, along with your parents right now, to tell them that you just went completely bankrupt without a single penny left," he whispered firmly. My mind raced with confusion, because lying to the people who raised me felt like a terrible betrayal of their trust. Snorts. However, I knew my partner possessed an incredibly sharp intuition regarding the true intentions of those around us. Swallowing my hesitation, I nodded slowly to confirm that I would follow his bizarre instructions to test their loyalty. Please subscribe to the channel to see how the shocking events that unfolded just a few days later proved that listening to my husband was the smartest decision of my entire life. I sat in front of my computer monitor late that night and opened the banking portal to review the transaction history from the past 5 years to verify if Thomas's assessment of my relatives held any truth. Sorting the outbound wire transfers by recipient name confirmed the pattern of exploitation because the data clearly showed that I functioned as an automated teller machine for my relatives. They withdrew funds directly from my business accounts to cover their personal expenses without considering the actual hours I spent securing those logistics contracts. Whenever they faced a disruption in their own income streams, my phone would ring with a demand for a cash transfer to avoid late fees on their mortgages. I exported the spreadsheets and calculated the exact total of unreturned funds, realizing the amount could have easily purchased a second warehouse for my operations. I pulled up the specific wire transfer record from 2 years ago when my sister Brenda and my brother-in-law Kyle requested a loan to purchase a commercial vehicle for Kyle to start an independent contracting business. They sent me a business plan outlining the need for a standard work van, but they used the funds to buy a fully loaded luxury truck instead. Kyle posted pictures of the vehicle on social media, boasting about his success, while I paid the dealership invoice directly from my corporate account. They signed a document promising to establish a repayment schedule, starting in January of that year, but never returned any money to my account. Whenever I brought up the outstanding debt during our Thanksgiving gatherings, Brenda deflected the conversation by accusing me of prioritizing corporate greed over family loyalty to make me feel guilty. She would purposefully leave the room crying and force our parents to step in to defend her actions. I navigated away from the checking accounts to the authorized user section of my credit account to examine the recent statement charges and saw the travel expenses accumulated by Mom. She swiped the supplementary card I provided exclusively for medical emergencies to book flights to resort destinations and pay for spa treatments while I worked 80 hours a week in the warehouse. I downloaded the receipts and saw massive charges for premium dining and boutique clothing stores that had absolutely nothing to do with health air or pharmacy visits. My parents operated under the assumption that paying for my childhood expenses entitled them to a permanent share of my corporate dividends and personal assets. I clicked on the billing details and saw that she maxed out the credit limit on that specific card 3 times in the last 6 months without asking for permission. This pattern of financial extraction contrasted completely with the actions Thomas took during the early days of my startup, when the company failed to generate any revenue. He worked double shifts at his engineering job to pay our mortgage and cover our grocery bills, while I focused entirely on securing our first major shipping client. While my family told me to close the business and get a normal job, Thomas liquidated his own retirement savings to pay my employees their salaries during our first year. He spent his weekends helping me load pallets in the warehouse to save money on labor costs, instead of taking time off for himself. I pushed aside the feelings of familial obligation, closed the banking portal, and picked up my smartphone to dial Mom to initiate the plan. I informed her that I needed to host a family dinner this upcoming weekend at my house to discuss a financial situation involving my company. She accepted the dinner invitation immediately while stating her expectation that I would serve catered seafood, and she completely failed to ask what the financial situation might be. I terminated the call and placed the phone face down on the desk because the stage was set for the test to begin. I walked out of the office and found Thomas waiting in the kitchen, and I nodded to confirm that everyone would arrive on Saturday evening. That weekend, my entire family gathered in the dining room of my house with eager expressions that clearly indicated their financial expectations. I carried the plates of catered seafood from the kitchen to the main table, while Thomas poured beverages into their glasses. Almost immediately after I placed the appetizer trays down, Brenda initiated the conversation by aggressively pitching a completely new business proposal. She pulled a glossy presentation folder from her designer handbag to outline Kyle's latest idea for a speculative commercial real estate venture. Brenda slid the documents across the table toward my plate, while demanding that I provide the initial startup capital by the end of the month. She explicitly stated that Kyle needed a massive cash injection to secure a prime office location before a rival investor could purchase the property. Kyle sat next to her, nodding enthusiastically while chewing his food instead of explaining the actual operational details of his proposed company. Brenda ignored the expensive catering I provided, choosing instead to tap her fingernails aggressively on the wooden table while waiting for my financial commitment. I looked at the inflated budget numbers printed on the top page without saying a word or agreeing to fund their risky experiment. Before I could even formulate a proper response to Brenda, Mom redirected the focus of the dinner entirely toward her own housing complaints. She loudly announced that the flooring in their current living room had suffered extensive water damage during a minor plumbing leak last week. Dad chimed in immediately to support her narrative by listing all the expensive contractors they had already contacted for premium renovation estimates. Mom pushed her empty appetizer plate aside to directly instruct me to cover the entire cost of the structural repairs alongside the luxury hardwood upgrades. She argued that paying for their home improvement project was my fundamental duty because my logistics firm had experienced a highly profitable quarter. Dad added that they expected the renovation funds to be wired into their joint checking account by Tuesday morning to secure the construction permits. They casually treated my corporate revenue as a shared family asset pool that existed solely to fix their personal property issues. I slowly lifted my head from the financial documents Brenda gave me to lock eyes with Thomas, sitting at the opposite end of the dining table. He placed his silverware down onto his napkin while offering a subtle nod to confirm that the perfect moment to execute our plan had arrived. I took a very deep breath to steady my nerves before standing up from my chair to command the attention of everyone in the room. I looked directly into the faces of my family members to ensure they were listening closely before delivering the fabricated news about my financial ruin. My logistics company has completely collapsed due to severe supply chain disruptions, leaving me currently carrying millions of dollars in corporate debt, I stated firmly. The entire room froze instantly as the reality of my statement interrupted their aggressive campaigns for additional funding alongside expensive home renovations. Seeing their stunned reactions, I maintained my serious expression while delivering the second part of the script Thomas had carefully prepared for me. The bank has already sent multiple warning notices regarding my defaulted loans, meaning they could come to foreclose on this house at any moment, I added. I lowered my voice to sound appropriately desperate while delivering the final line of my performance to test their emotional response. I really do not know what to do next or how I will survive this bankruptcy without losing absolutely everything I own, I told them. I sat back down in my chair, waiting patiently in the heavy silence for someone to offer a comforting hug or a word of encouragement. I hoped that at least one person sharing my bloodline would express genuine concern for my well-being, rather than worrying about their lost funding source. Instead of receiving any familial support or empathy, I was met with a terrifyingly quiet atmosphere that dominated the entire dining room. Mom crossed her arms over her chest, displaying a defensive posture while refusing to look me in the eye after my devastating revelation. Nobody stood up to comfort me or suggested that we could figure out a solution to the massive financial crisis I had just described. They simply stared at me with widened eyes while processing the fact that the unlimited cash supply they relied on had suddenly evaporated. Only a few seconds after my devastating financial declaration, the previously lively atmosphere inside the dining room shattered into absolute panic. Brenda immediately jumped out of her dining chair while dropping her presentation folder directly onto the floor. She aggressively pointed her finger at my face while demanding to know who would continue making the expensive monthly payments for her luxury commercial truck. Instead of asking if Thomas and I possessed enough money to buy groceries, she complained that a vehicle repossession would completely ruin her pristine credit score. Kyle finally stopped chewing his catered seafood to stare at me with obvious disgust before crossing his arms defensively over his chest. "You deliberately wasted our valuable weekend evening listening to my real estate pitch when you already knew your logistics company possessed absolutely zero investment capital," Kyle complained bitterly. Mom completely ignored my visible emotional distress while frantically digging through her oversized designer handbag to locate her leather wallet. She pulled out the supplementary credit card I gave her last year, while furiously checking the expiration date printed on the plastic. She held the card up toward the ceiling light to inspect the account numbers before turning her furious gaze back toward my face. What exactly is going to happen with this secondary credit card right now? Or will the corporate bank automatically lock my purchasing account before tomorrow morning? Mom demanded loudly. Instead of offering to return the supplementary credit card to help reduce my outstanding corporate balances, Mom tightly gripped the plastic rectangle in her fist. She actually commanded me to transfer a large sum of money into her personal checking account immediately before the government regulators could freeze my corporate assets. She justified this outrageous demand by claiming she needed emergency funds to protect her retirement savings from my legal troubles. I stared at her demanding face while refusing to process any unauthorized transfers on my banking application. Dad shook his head in obvious disappointment while pushing his half-eaten plate of expensive food away from him to lean heavily against the wooden table edge. He offered absolutely no words of comfort or parental support while observing my supposedly ruined financial state from his seat at the dining table. He adjusted his eyeglasses while looking at me with the same critical expression he always used to display during my childhood mistakes. "You brought this massive disaster entirely upon yourself by taking unnecessary entrepreneurial risks. So you must deal with the severe consequences alone without dragging this family down with you," Dad stated coldly. The four of them immediately launched into a highly coordinated verbal attack to blame my lack of corporate discipline for the sudden logistics bankruptcy. Brenda accused me of maliciously deceiving them about my profit margins during the past 6 months, just to avoid funding their speculative ventures. She explicitly reminded me that my personal signature remained permanently attached to the co-signed loan documents for their current residential mortgage. Brenda demanded that I immediately contact the mortgage lender to remove my name from their property deeds before my corporate bankruptcy triggered a default clause on their home. Mom firmly stated that she would absolutely not allow me to move back into my childhood bedroom to escape the impending bank foreclosure on my current residence. Dad explicitly warned me against using his home telephone number as a reference contact for any aggressive debt collectors attempting to recover my corporate loans. They spent the next several minutes establishing strict financial boundaries to ensure my corporate debt would never affect their personal bank accounts or their comfortable daily routines. Less than 10 minutes after hearing the fabricated news regarding my empty checking accounts, my relatives simultaneously prepared to abandon my house. Brenda snatched her dropped folder from the floor while aggressively signaling Kyle to retrieve their coats from the hallway closet near the entrance. Mom shoved the credit card back into her purse while loudly inventing a completely fake emergency regarding a neighborhood association meeting she suddenly needed to attend. Dad followed closely behind his wife, without turning his head around to offer a final word of encouragement or a simple parting gesture. They practically ran through the front entrance to escape the perceived burden of my financial collapse without even thanking me for purchasing the catered dinner. I sat silently at the dining table, listening to the loud slam of the front door echoing through the hallway, while Thomas reached across the wooden surface to hold my hand. 2 days later, I drove my vehicle across town to personally confront my relatives to discover exactly how far their cruelty would extend. My first destination,